Hello, boys and girls of credit union land, and welcome to episode 41 of the CUInsight Experience. My name is Randy Smith. I am one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and it is my job on the show to have conversations with the best and the brightest of the credit union community. I get to pick their brains and see if we can't find a few nuggets that we can all learn from. My guest on today's show is Miriam De Dios Woodward. Miriam is the president and CEO of PolicyWorks and involved in a whole lot more in our movement and outside. In this episode, we have a wide-ranging conversation. We span the burden that credit unions are facing when it comes to compliance, diversity, equity, inclusion, a whole lot of leadership lessons and life hacks, including starting the day with a green smoothie. I'd also check out the show notes. Miriam had some amazing book recommendations that if you haven't read, they're ones you really should pick up. I share her recommendation on quite a few of them. As you'll hear, Miriam is somebody that I wanted to get on the podcast for a long time. It was worth the wait. She had a good reason for why she hadn't been on yet. So without further ado, I give you my conversation with Miriam. Enjoy. Miriam, welcome to the show. I've been so excited to have you on.
Thank you so much, Randy. Yes, I've been looking forward to this.
You had a busy summer, so let me start by saying congratulations with the new addition to your family.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Yes, busy summer and just, an incredible last year, I would say, but thank you so much.
Yeah, I would say so. And that's really where I wanted to start was a question that the last time we saw each other in California, I'd asked you, CUInsight to compliance. Talk about making that switch. It's almost been a year now. What's the transition been like? What motivated you to make that jump?
Yes. Well, certainly you might think CUInsight and compliance, two completely different areas. Yes. And at the same time, there's kind of some similarities that, were really, I guess, top of mind for me when I looked at this position of being the CEO of PolicyWorks. And I will say the transition has been a smooth one. I have a fantastic team. And for those of you who may not know, CUInsight and PolicyWorks are actually sister organizations. So some familiarity there. Both are working with credit unions to solve their problems. I would say one of the biggest differences, though, is that PolicyWorks is, a bit bigger of an organization. The magnitude of just that piece of just being a bit bigger, there's, I'd say, a bit more of a challenge, a good challenge to look at how to grow the organization. And that was really one of the things that attracted me to the position. I was with CUInsight since its inception, which was about, almost 12 years, and really enjoyed, seeing the organization go from essentially a startup to where it is today. And I've never been afraid of a career challenge. And, PolicyWorks, it's something I had to think about a lot, but at the same time, was just kind of ready for, that next business challenge for me. And I've found some ways to intersect Hispanic outreach with compliance, which has been really good because Hispanic outreach will always be, a part of me. It's something I'm still very passionate about. And it's just the focus of what I'm doing now is similar, but just in a different area.
Yeah. And a new challenge is always fun, right? So yeah. I'm with you on that. I mean, you really are now, like to talk about PolicyWorks, you're on the front line of compliance issues that are affecting credit unions. What are some of the struggles that you and your team are seeing out there, today? And what's PolicyWorks doing to help?
Yes. Well, I'd say one of the biggest challenges that hasn't necessarily gone away, since PolicyWorks has been around is just that the challenge that credit unions have to keep up with, the regulatory and compliance burden out there, that hasn't eased. And there's different levels of that for every credit union. But, even the smallest credit unions have compliance requirements. Now, larger ones have even, more. And so helping credit unions, get back to focusing on their operations and their members is what, really we're here to help them do by taking on that compliance burden for them. So, really looking at ways to ease that for them, to be an extension of their teams so that they can get back to, those really important things. Not that compliance isn't important, but, we have teams and folks that specialize in, regulations and compliance. So just really helping address that. And I'm telling you, it's a challenge for every credit union out there.
You mentioned something, and it seems like in conversations with the smaller credit unions, whether you hear about mergers or, whatever it happens to be, that compliance and technology seem to be the two issues, right? Like on how can the small credit union keep up? So is that an area that PolicyWorks really focuses on, helping through that?
We do in the sense of, being that partner, that they can turn to, that, focuses on this 24/7, right? And we work with credit unions of all sizes across the country. So definitely just, being that resource for them so that, they don't have to be tasked with just this volume of work and keeping up with all the regulations and understanding, what that means to their operations every day. So definitely, yes.
Yeah, that's fantastic. When I was doing research, scouring the interwebs, learning all about you, to say that you are involved in a lot, I often wondered when you sleep. You're just involved in so many different, organizations. You mentioned CUInsight earlier. I feel like you were, involved with DEI before it became kind of something more people were talking about. So first of all, why throughout your career, why has it been important for you to be involved, I'd say like system wide and even outside of the credit union industry? And is there a passion project you're currently working on that you want to give a shout out to?
Sure. Well, you mentioned something about sleep. I can tell you that sleep is, a relative term these days. So my focus has changed, a bit over time, and my involvement has kind of ebbed and flowed as well. But I would say, involvement for me comes from just a notion of wanting to be, engaged with people. I learn a lot from people, and I'm a continuous learner. So being involved exposes you to new folks, new ideas, seeing how different, in some cases, as I've been on boards, seeing how different organizations run, seeing leaders in action. So that's really interesting and intriguing to me. And I'll always find ways to do that. I've learned over time to be a bit more, I guess, guarded with my time, because there's been times where I've probably overdone it. And so I've, come to the point of recognizing that and just being a bit more strategic with my time. And there's certainly, it seems like less of it right now as a new parent. So that's, definitely top of mind these days. But I would say outside of that, it's important for me to make a difference too. And as I'm learning, I feel that, there's things that I can, provide others, or at least share, best practices or things that I've learned over time that might help, individuals, or that might help organizations. So that's where that involvement piece comes from. In terms of a passion project, I can tell you before we knew that we were expecting, my husband and I really got on this kind of health and fitness kick. And so we became vegans and completely changed our lifestyle of, eating and just a more focus on fitness. Then we found out, we were pregnant. So for me, some things changed, but it's starting to get back into that as well. I'd say is, one of the areas I'm focused on right now, but probably the biggest passion project would be my daughter right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess parenting, raising her, figuring out how to parent in many cases, because it's new to us, right? So I would say that's where I'm spending a good amount of time, as well as, running our organization. So,
I'd like to ask you a question about diversity. Obviously, you have a past in that, and it's been something that I've tried to keep front and center on the show just to talk about. And one of the questions that I like to ask, I guess I should say, is when we're looking at diversity and inclusion, is it something that you feel is done at a credit union level, at an individual level? Is it a system level? Is it, all of the above? I mean, you spent a lot of time, and you mentioned even in PolicyWorks, being able to merge the two together. So thoughts on that?
Yeah, where does it start? Well, I can tell you, all of the kind of levels you mentioned, they're all important. I think it starts with the individual. It starts with the credit union. It starts with the system. And what I mean by that is just to get the conversation going, right? It needs to be talked about more because it's a beast of an area, diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's a lot entailed there. And you can start with that in many ways, depending on, kind of your individual kind of interests or, credit union priorities or system priorities. So I'd say, any one of those areas, starting with the conversation is really important. And at the same time, what makes up the system and what makes up credit unions, I would say people.
So, Miriam, is there a belief in credit unions that you think will fundamentally have to change, in the near future to stay relevant?
Well, on the topic of DEI, I would say embracing it, certainly will be an important, I would say, opportunity for credit unions. And reason for that is, you look around, the demographics are changing in our country, and this directly applies to credit unions and who they're serving, who they're hiring, looking at the makeup of leadership and management and boards. And so really embracing it, I think it's going to be critical. And in my opinion, it doesn't have to be a difficult thing. You start with having the conversation. What does it mean for your credit union? And, ultimately, once you start to dig in, you realize this is part of the DNA of credit unions.
Absolutely.
It's just a matter of being intentional about it. And I do think it's important for, individual leaders to take action on it as well. So beyond the conversation, that just kind of gets you going in terms of where to start. Then, just being accountable to actually taking steps toward more inclusivity and looking at ways to reflect more of the communities that credit unions are serving, not only in their membership, but also internally. And then that's from a DEI standpoint. I think from looking at my world today of compliance, compliance is something that credit unions and really organizations have to do. It's just a cost of doing business. But from that sense, being as proactive about it and strategic about it and working with partners that can help you, address these challenges in a different way. I mean, I think that's a mindset that can be very beneficial for the system as well.
Absolutely. There's probably not going to be less compliance issues, right?
Correct. So. Yeah. Doesn't look like
it does not seem that way. I'd like to move on to the second part of the show, the leadership and life hacks. As we've touched on, we kind of touched on why you took the gig as president and CEO of PolicyWorks. The question I had for you was how did you find your way into credit union land, and what inspired you once you got into it, I guess, to make it a career choice?
Sure. Well, really interesting story. I would say I stumbled upon credit unions. It was just a happenstance type of thing, and one of the best decisions I've ever made. But so the story goes that my manager at a prior job to Coopera's would end up marrying Coopera's founder, Warren Mark.
Okay.
And so kind of fast forward, I get a call from her. Her name was Christina when Warren had started Coopera. And, she had remembered our work together. Warren was looking for folks that were bilingual, bicultural, had a business background, marketing background, and she thought of me. So I applied for the position. I met Warren, and I know, many folks in the system got to meet Warren. Warren unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but I had the chance to meet him, and just an amazing individual, visionary leader, had just this awesome picture that he painted of inclusivity and starting an organization to really focus on that. And I was like, yes, sign me up. I'm in. And that was my entry into the credit union system. And from then on, it was just neat to be able to experience credit unions and see the difference of working for, a mission-driven organization and just seeing and understanding the roots of credit unions and, their people helping people philosophy that I've been in the system really ever since.
I think most of us stumbled into credit unions, right? And then we're like, ooh, I like it here. So
Yes.
has the inspiration changed at all, in the past year in your current role of leading PolicyWorks?
No, I mean, my inspiration in working with credit unions and, being a part of a mission-driven organization has not. Certainly at PolicyWorks, my connection and my I guess, that personal connection of being Hispanic and bringing in my culture and background is not something I do, every single day at PolicyWorks like I did at Coopera. At the same time, right now, I'm very, excited about the growth opportunities for our organization. And, I love business. I love growing organizations and thinking about strategies for growth and implementing those, looking at our client experience, those types of things really fuel me from a business standpoint. And that's just where I'm at today. But at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, I still find ways to connect to, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so finding ways to intersect that with, whatever I do. And I'll continue to do that no matter, what my role is in the future as well.
If you don't mind, I have a question. When you were answering that, I started to think, it's been about a year now. And when you talked about sounds like you enjoy getting into the business process, and that idea of growing business, as you said. Is there something like for, say, another new leader who comes into an organization, maybe they're coming in as a CEO. Was there anything in the past year that did you take time to just observe, or is there any hacks that you maybe have that you could share with somebody else who's, walking in day one, existing company, they're the CEO, that you learned over the year?
Sure. I would say one of the most important things for me to do right away was to connect with our people, connect with our team and really, sit one-on-one with everybody in the organization, which is one of the very first things I did, to hear their perspective of, what they love about the organization, what opportunities that they see, what challenges the organization has, and to get to know them, individually. What are their interests for the future? I would say that was very critical and very important for me. I'd say that's one of the ways that I connect from a leadership standpoint. My style is to really, and I'm, there's all sorts of management and leadership styles, but I'd like to think that, people come first for me when it comes to leadership. And so that's one of the first things I made sure to do. So I would certainly advise that to anyone. I think you learn a lot beyond just reading things or, digging into documents and reading materials. All of those things can reinforce, but there's nothing like hearing it directly from your team and to start to build the connection with the team in that way.
So a people first leadership style, how would your team at PolicyWorks describe your leadership style?
I'd like to think that it aligns, okay. In terms of that people first, they probably would also say I'm pretty performance driven and results driven as well. And that would be accurate. That there's just always a lot to do, but I like to, kind of strategize around that, work with folks to get their input on that and, work together on creating or making, a vision possible. So I would like to say, the people aspect aligns with what they would say, but also, I'm pretty performance driven and results driven. Well.
Performance as well. Is there a line that your team's heard you say so many times they can finish your sentence?
Well, I can tell you we've talked about change quite a lot. I don't know about a line necessarily. Just maybe, I'm sure they've heard me say, the importance of embracing change and just being comfortable with change. And lately, too, I would say we're talking a lot about simplicity and, how do we keep things simple? And it's so easy, to start to head into complexity and to create complicated processes. So just taking a step back and thinking about, okay, is that simple? Are we simplifying our lives with this or creating more complexity?
It's so easy just to add, right? And not subtract. So that I absolutely love that. That's something we've been talking about a ton at CUInsight too, is just how do we make this as simple as possible for everybody, right? So is there a mistake that you made as a young leader or maybe one that you see young leaders make often?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say kind of early on in my career, probably a mistake I made was not embracing my differences and using them as an opportunity to connect to people and to maybe, share experiences or just kind of, different ways of maybe thinking or opening up maybe their eyes to a new background to connect to people. So, for example, earlier kind of jobs, I remember sitting maybe in on, different groups. And as you meet new people, you try to find common ground and, know a little bit about their background. And when, folks started to share maybe different things about their background or let's say how they grew up, I sometimes would hear kind of similar things. And my upbringing was a little bit different coming from an immigrant background. My family moved around a lot. I wasn't too involved in sports, for example, growing up. So certain things that might have been different to, how other people were raised that oftentimes came up in, maybe introductions or as you're meeting with people, I would often shy away from discussing that. And I look back on it now. It's interesting because that completely changed when I was at Corporate. I mean, this is all I talked about because was a way to show that difference and to bring understanding and, just, empathy for a different lifestyle that, maybe new members at a credit union may have that, staff maybe didn't experience. So just recognizing that could have been a way to connect versus keeping quiet about it to maybe try to fit in more, I would say.
It's a beautiful thing when we get good with ourselves, right? Like as we get older. So we hope we do at least. Any memorable failures that come to mind that like when you look back at them today, you're like, wow, I'm glad that happened because it, kind of changed the course?
There's probably, lots of mistakes I've made and, failures over time. If kind of thinking about maybe how to summarize, some that I've learned a lot from would be just from a career standpoint, times when I didn't leverage the resources around me to make more informed decisions or just to get a different perspective or, work with someone to get more feedback and use them as a sounding board because I maybe wanted to get things done quickly. I've had a few of those situations. And so they're all learning moments. And I would say, it may get you to an end destination quicker, but the result may not be as robust, or you may have missed, an angle you didn't think of. So at the same time, you don't want to slow down the process, but incorporating feedback and really leveraging, the resources around you has been something I keep in mind now from, some of those mistakes I've made earlier on too.
That's a good lesson to learn. Has there, it kind of ties right into the next question. Has there been a piece of advice or life lesson that you received earlier in your career from somebody that you find yourself going back to often?
Yeah. I've had the opportunity to have just a variety of great mentors over time and picked up different things from each one. A few that come to mind, and this was early on in my career, actually my manager at the time, in talking about personal development opportunities, always, would tell me it's important for you to make the time because it can be one of those things that falls to the bottom of the list. And so if you don't make the time for it, it's never going to happen. So, that's, I think about that often, making that time for you to invest in yourself, not leaving it on the back burner because it's easy to do. Another maybe piece of advice would be to lead from this notion of abundance instead of scarcity. So keeping in mind expansive possibilities when you are thinking about new ideas or thinking about the future versus, thinking about all your limitations from the very beginning. You end up in a much, better place, I've found, when you do that. And, you keep all options on the table from the very beginning, which is exciting. And it creates just, momentum and just a good positive conversation versus starting with all the ways that, something may not be possible. So I keep that in mind as well.
That is something that you share with Jill. I will say that the word abundance has come into my head much more over the past couple of years when she talks about leading from and starting from a place of abundance. So I love that. That is beautiful. A question that I had and you mentioned a few different things actually as we've been talking today about like when you're talking about process and the simplicity and, things of that nature. How do you make sure that the message, like PolicyWorks, I'd take this take a step back in this. How do you make sure that your message stays clear and on point to your team, but also PolicyWorks message is staying, fresh and getting through to the credit unions you work with as well?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. I think that, you learn a lot from people, and leaving the door open for feedback is great. I've embraced that. And so one way I would say to, that I make sure that my message stays relevant would be to, just ask for feedback from the team because they'll tell you if something's off, or not. And I'd say similarly, gathering feedback from our clients from an overall PolicyWorks standpoint, because they're the folks that we're providing services to. We want to make sure that we're meeting their needs. And you also, if you ask for feedback, you have to listen to it and, do something with it. And so if that means adjusting and changing things, we'd like to think that we do that. And similarly, as an individual, that's important for me as well, to gather that feedback, to learn, from folks in terms of how your messages are being perceived and make adjustments accordingly. And I would say it's also important to, kind of come back to your why, making sure that, your message always has that why. And that's always a good checkpoint to make sure that, it is relevant. If that why is not relevant, then your message is probably not going to be relevant as well.
I like that. That is a good place to always come back to, right? Like it's kind of have an anchor there. If you have a free day, and I know these are few and far between right now, but there's nothing on the calendar. What passions do you have outside of credit unions? What do you do to recharge?
Yes. Well, and I can tell you this has changed over time. Right now, spending as much time as I can with my daughter is important, and my husband. In addition to that, we, as a family, love to travel. So on a free day, I might be thinking about maybe planning a road trip or, just getting out on the road somewhere to try to, catch a new restaurant somewhere or just, kind of experience something new. There's a list of books I'm not, getting to, and I'm one of those people that kind of has 3 going at the same time. So it's more like I need to finish some books too.
Right.
But I probably grab one of those to get going on that.
Yeah, I want to be respectful of your time, so I'd like to move on to the third and final part of the show. Just have a little bit of fun. The rapid fire questions. The questions are rapid, but your answers don't have to be. So, do you remember the first time you got into memorable trouble? Like something you can share?
I had to think about this. So, I will say I'm one of those people that, tries to and has always tried to avoid trouble. If anything, I probably got into the most trouble when I was younger. But one of the incidents that comes to mind was when my mom and I were visiting a friend, and I happened to find a bottle of nail polish, took that into a bedroom with me, locked the door, and had fun with that nail polish.
The walls weren't the same after.
Oh, yes.
That's
so
great.
That was fun for me. I don't think fun for a friend or my mom.
Absolutely. That's a good one. Do you have any daily routines that if you just don't do, your day feels off?
I will say not having a green shake or smoothie in the morning really can, throw things off for me. It's something my husband and I got into, again, when we kind of made our lifestyle change in terms of our eating habits. And, some mornings there's not enough time to make it. And I can tell you it does make a difference.
If you don't mind me asking, was there a motivation behind making that? You've mentioned that earlier too.
Yes, it was an easy way for us to get, a good amount of nutrition in the morning, and looking at getting your veggies and fruits, right off the bat, and just really gaining, some good energy for the morning. So we got into the habit of making those kind of green shakes and smoothies, and just, still trying to figure out mornings and time with the baby and all those things that, it doesn't always happen every morning now.
I'm sure your mornings are a bit different now. So the random question, what's the best album of all time? That one you can listen to without skipping a song.
Well, I'll tell you what. Growing up, I listened to really only Spanish music for a long time. And it wasn't until I was a teenager that, I started to listen to really more kind of English music. And for some reason, you'll find this funny, I listened to a lot of like oldies for a while. So like think like Beach Boys, things like that. But so I was the worst at, popular music, and I still am. I'm terrible, but I will say, over time, I love to listen to both English and Spanish music. One of my most favorite albums was actually Shakira's really early stuff. So not her poppy stuff now. Okay. There's an album called Pies Descalzos that, I listen to over and over, and a variety of other, just really, I would say, music all over the place, from, regional Mexican music to the Beatles to, Destiny's Child. But that Shakira album I come back to a lot.
You come back to. We will link to it for sure. So you mentioned being a reader and having the 3 books going. I am also a reader and share that as well. Jill and I have a stack of books that we're trying to get through, and a lot of them come from recommendations. Yes. Is there a book over time that you've either gifted people or you just think everybody should read?
Sure. Well, I've gifted books kind of for different reasons. One of these has been for mentees. So I've been a mentor for the Latina Leadership Initiative here in Des Moines for a few years, and a book I come back to that I always give to my mentees has been the Strengths Finder book. And then a few times too, Emotional Intelligence. Yep. Yeah. Just because, those are books that I found very helpful for me. And Lean In has also been an awesome one. But for other reasons, to my teams, Trusted Advisor and Servant Leadership, I would say are also two go-tos.
It's a good list of books, that's for sure. Uh-huh. I just recently downloaded the Emotional Intelligence on Audible because I'd read it years ago, but it kept coming back up. I'm like, I think that might be a good one to go back over. So it was, that was, just a few months ago. This is one of my favorite questions to ask, and we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, so I was excited to ask you this. But as you've gotten older, has something become more important to you? And my favorite part of the question, what's become less important?
Mm-hmm. Well, I can tell you that, family has always been important, but I would say what's most important now is that time with family. And so, to prioritize, that family time means that you have to do less of other things. So, for me, it's being, strategic about my volunteer time, outside of work, or, thinking about how I, just spend my time maybe doing other things and helping other organizations. I still want to do that, but it's certainly, something has to give. And so it's just being more strategic about that so that I can spend more time with my family and, raise a little girl and focus on family. So every day it's a balance. It's not an easy thing to do. And it's wonderful that, I have just a great husband that can, help me figure out this balance thing, and we can do it together. But time has become increasingly important. And so just, using it wisely and thinking about it ahead of time too. I'm finding myself doing that quite a bit.
I'm a believer in a lot of the times we just have to say no. So it's a conversation Jill and I have often because I'm kind of in the camp of if it's not a hell yes, it's a no. And she's more like if it's not a, hell no, then it's a sure, why not? Let's try it. It's, we talk about that all the time, but we only have so much time in the day. There's a question that I don't send. When you hear the word success, who's the first person that comes to mind?
Michelle Obama, only because I recently read her book too.
I think it was last week. I just downloaded that on Audible because I've been meaning to get to it. So her book, I think, is everybody that's been reading it. You're the second person now just recently on the podcast who said that. So I love it. I absolutely love it. I'm looking forward to it. Did you just finish reading it or you're in the midst or?
No, but a few months ago.
Okay.
I downloaded it on Audible as well, and it was something I listened to. Yeah, a little bit every day.
I am looking forward to getting into it. That's for sure. I want to thank you again for being on the show, Miriam. Is the last question I have for you. Do you have any final asks or thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners today?
Well, it's been an awesome time. Thank you, Randy. Just and I know, folks know this, but it's really exciting to be part of a unique movement like ours. We talked a bit about diversity and inclusion today. I would say, keep talking about that at your shops and, explore that for you individually and what that means and how can you lead that. And don't forget about, that compliance burden, and don't let that overwhelm your organization. There's great resources and partners like PolicyWorks that can certainly help you with that. But I would say those are a few things to keep in mind.
So that is the perfect way to end. We will link to everything we talked about today in the show notes. Is @BusinessMiriam on Twitter a good way for people to get a hold of you if they have additional questions?
You got it. And I'm also on LinkedIn, so folks can message me there as well.
We'll link to both of those. I, again, thank you so much. This was so much fun, and I hope to see you soon at one of these events out there. Thanks again, Miriam. I appreciate it.
Definitely. Thank you, Randy.
Have a great day.
You too.